And that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake. And I'm sorry.
That mistake created thousands of websites today. React is by far the most popular JavaScript framework, and you will need to learn it if you want to get a job. The majority of tutorials out there are really long, like from 1 hour to 10 hours. But in my short 30 minutes tutorial, we'll build a to-do list application that syncs up to a database called local storage. And with that application, you will learn so many React concepts such as state, components, props, and more. And even custom hooks. This video was a ton of work, so please make sure to like and subscribe. So let's get started with our React application. First of all, we're not going to create React app using the default CLI because nobody really does that anymore. So what we're going to do, I have my folder called Pluto. It's pretty random. I just like naming stuff pretty random, you know. Pluto is a nice planet. So let's get started building our application. So we have to run npm init. So to get started, we're going to be using a tool called Vite. So Vite, we can come here, and a really fun fact about Pluto is that Pluto will experience the sunlight 300 times dimmer. So what that means is that when at evening, almost at night time, that's when it's at noon in Pluto. So let's copy this and let's paste this in. So we're going to create Vite at latest. So this is going to ask us a bunch of questions because Vite is not React exclusive. You can use it with any other framework you want to use it with. So it's going to ask us a project name. I'm going to put dot because I'm already in my Pluto folder. I like my Pluto folder. It's a package name. You can call it Pluto. Actually, you could call it Learn React, but see, we can use vanilla JavaScript. We're going to use React. We're going to use JavaScript. And now we have everything completed. So what we just clear. So we just have to do just run npm I to install the dependency. So if you have never touched the framework or kind of JavaScript framework, this might be looking strange, but it's actually not. What we are installing React through a CLI. And this package.json is the package that has React inside. So the reason why we are running npm I is that the React library is very huge. So normally we don't carry this node modules folder. This node modules folder, you can see, is very huge. It has every single thing that we need for our React. So we don't normally carry it everywhere. Okay, so please this is where our React code gets rendered. And React is a component-based library. So what that means is that we write a couple of JavaScript here, and our JavaScript gets rendered to the DOM. As you can see here, what we're doing here is that we have a div class name of root. And if you notice, if you're pretty observant, you should know that this here is a class root of root. So when we write our JavaScript, it gets rendered to the DOM in this file. So this is like a configuration file. And it says it's create root, not render, not React or render, because that's quite a create root is for React 18. So these files inside the source folder are called components, and you notice that it's not in JS, it's in JSX, because we don't write JSX, we write JSX code. So what is JSX code? JSX stands for HTML and JavaScript. So I'm going to run npm run dev so you can see this in the browser. So this is our JSX code, and you can notice that it is class name, not class, because class, is JSX, JavaScript, and HTML. Class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. So we make classes in JavaScript. It's like calling this let. When your let is already reserved or is used for something else. So we're going to click this, and we see our application in the browser. We should see it any minute. You can see that here. So we're going to quickly delete everything. And the one nice advantage of it is that it has hot module reloading. Okay, go back. We're going to remove the state for a second, remove everything here, and save. This is what we get, just a blank screen. Let's keep this on the right. So what I want to do now is that we could write HTML to do app, and that is affected by our app.css. So app.css We want to remove that. And index.css, we also want, so this index.css affects every single component. While as you guess, the app.css only affects one component. So I'm just going to leave these ones here. Maybe we could just remove everything. Just remove everything. We'll write our own styles. Okay. Except the font. Except the font. Because the browser gives us a garbage font. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start building our application. So how do we write state in React? So first of all, I could write some JavaScript code here. So I could just gonna say constant name is gonna be equal to Alex. That's actually my name. Okay, so we could render out the name like this in curly braces, and curly braces is how you write dynamic value name. So we could have a button, for an example, button says submit. Okay, submit. And this is just a demo. I'm just trying to just make show you something. And if we attach an on click to this button, and let's just say I said we could write some JavaScript. Oops, sorry about this. So what we could do is I could run a function here and say name equals not Alex. So save. So what this is doing is that this is how we run events in React. We can just apply it to the elements instead of imperatively doing that in JavaScript, selecting now in React we don't do that. So we can save this, and in fact you can add a comma and just say console.log name. So if you click on submit, it changes the name but it doesn't change it up there. And the reason for that, and we're just going to check it out here, it says uncaught error. Okay, this is a constant actually. Let's make it a let. Save, come here, click. It changes the name here as we can see, but it doesn't change here because this is not a reactive value. So React doesn't re-render the component. So to make it a reactive value, we use something called a state. So constant, we use array destructuring, and the second one is set whatever. Doesn't actually has to be, but that is like a convention which I highly recommend you do so you don't get confused. Use state, and we import that from React, and we can set it to a value of well, let's just say Alex again. So what we're doing here is that we're making a variable name and a function to update that name variable. So instead of saying name, what do we use? We use set name. Set name not Alex. So submit, let's see what happens. It actually changes it because this value is a reactive value. So that's what I just want to that's one of React hook. This thing is called a hook in React. So first of all, this is not what we're going to do. I just want to just say that so that you understand that. So set to dos and to dos. We're going to have a to dos state, right? It's going to be equal to use state of an empty array. Sorry, use state is a function. So we have two pieces of states essentially. Sorry, refresh this. Is on autosave. So we have two pieces of states. Sorry, actually one piece of state. Set to do and a function to update it. Okay. So we are rearranging nothing to the screen. So let's populate that. We're going to have a to do app. And what we have to do is that we have to have a form and something to render out the to do. So we're going to say form. Actually, form. The action is going to go to nowhere. I'm going to have an input type equal text, and we also need another piece of state to track the input. So constant input set input is going to be equal to use state, and this is going to be a string by default. So what we're going to do is that we're going to say on change. What we want to do is I want to wrap this in an anonymous function, and by the way, I'll show you how to pass in normal functions. Set input, and we want to pass in eval.target.value. And by the way, we can pass in the event handler here. So If you want to just check if that's running, we can just output the input like so. So whenever we type, you can see that is keeping track of that value. So we have our input being tracked. Very cool. So what we want to do is that we also want to have a button, but as you can see in the tutorial, it had a button, submit. What we want to do is I want to make this button type submit, type submit. That just means that if they click enter or click enter on the input or hit the submit button, the form is going to automatically submit. And when the form automatically submits, you want to listen to that. So you can just pass in a function here called handle submit. Copy const handle submit. Remember, the event function is already passed into us. We don't have to do this because we were doing an anonymous function. We had to take it here. And remember, if you wanted to pass in something, you could not run it like this, because if you do run it like this, it's immediately going to run. So if you want to pass in an argument to this function, you make it into an arrow function like this. Take note of that. If you want to pass in something, make it into an arrow function like this, and pass in whatever you want to pass in. But we're not passing because the event object is automatically passed into this function. So what do we want to do? First of all, we want to prevent the sum from refreshing. If either prevent default. So when we want to prevent the default, we want to add to this to-dos array. So we want to say to-dos, actually set to-dos, right? I want it to be an array, and we want to put in what was inside to-dos before, so that we don't override it with new values. Plus, we want to pass in an object actually. To do text, and the to do text is simply the input, and we want an ID. And you'll see why this is useful in a minute. So we're going to say crypto, use the crypto module.get actually random ID. So what we're not doing here is no fancy stuff. We're preventing the sum from fluctuating. Then we set to do's we set what was inside to do's before. So if it was null, whatever is going to be set here, then we pass in a new object, and the new object is going to be what the user typed and an ID. So let's check that up. And I have the React Chrome extensions, which I highly recommend you download. It's going to help you debug better. So we're going to click on inspect. So with the React Chrome extensions, I can come to components and I can view the state of that component. So as you can see here, we have two states. I can say buy milk. Click enter. We can see what is inside that state. You can see this random generated ID. I can see the buy milk. Buy milk 2, you can see it again. So that's what this spreading is used for. If we remove this and you say, well, it's not necessary, we put buy milk, it's always gonna override it. As you can see, no new thing is added. So that's the importance of the spread operator. So what do we want to do here? We want to use a UL to render it out. And we can write some JavaScript here. We know that. So we want to say to do's dot map to do. This is using the map array method. There's really nothing here. It's just simple JavaScript. And we want to return a bit of template. So this is going to go through each individual to do's. And for each one, we want to return an li of to do text, which was actually there, and an X button. And this X button is going to be in a span. This is going to be to delete the to do. So let's check it out. Buy milk. So we see that there. Buy milk 2, buy milk 3, buy milk 4. So our to-do list application is working well, but it still has a long way to go. Thought this video would be a short video, but I must be naive. So let's continue. So we have the basic functionality, John. Just add the delete function. So how do we add that delete function here? And but moreover, we're going to add the CSS later, so don't worry about that. So we're going to have an error in the browser or a warning because, and let's read the error. It says each child in the list should have a unique key or prop. So when React is rendering out a list of values, as you can see here, not necessarily meaning an li, this could be a paragraph, it's to give the same error. What is when it's rendering a list of values, it needs a key for each individual value so that if any value should change in the future, it will know which exact one to update. And we're not doing that. So the way we can do that is by saying key to do dot id. So you see the importance of that. So what we want to do now is that we want to have an handle delete function to take care of deleting to dos. So we want to say on colon click, and because we could just pass it like this and say something like handle delete. I want to pass in the to do dot id, but what is wrong with this? I want you to take a second and see what is wrong with this. So I'm just going to const make that function. So this is going to be like your own kind of quiz, or if you like, you're going to tell us what is exactly wrong with this. So I'm just going to console the log here. So let's click on submit. You can see that we get that here, which is kind of strange. Why do we have that here? But we haven't even clicked it. We're clicking a button and having here. So what is happening is that as soon as this renders out to the DOM, it calls this function immediately. So this is why we have to put this in an anonymous function. So this will prevent it from calling up immediately. So now it no longer calls immediately. And what we have to do is that we take in that ID there. And what we're going to do is that we're going to filter out the array. So to do's dot filter, we're taking each individual to do. And what we want to return if the value is true or false. So we want to say to do dot id not equal to id. And I'm going to save this and say new to do, right? So I'll explain the code in a second. Let's just see if this works. Set to do's, new to do's, because there's nothing really complex here. Just trust me. So let's click on one. Okay, let's test it. Test. So we can click on the X, 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 and the delete function is working. But why is it working? What is this method actually doing? How can one line of code make a delete function work? Well, I know you have those kind of questions. So what is happening here is that we say to do the filter and we return. This is a shorthand of return. We say to do return to do id that is not equal to this id. So if we pass in, for example, an id of 1, it's going to cycle through it and going to say, oh, we're going to return every single one that does not equal to that one. So if we click this one, this is the target id. It's going to return every single one that does not equal to that id. So, and this is every single one, the one that except for the one that we clicked, everything up is the target. So I hope you understand. So let me try again. It's going to return every single one that we did not click. That's what happens here. It returns every single one that we did not click. So that's how this then so it's going to return that new array to this new to-dos variable, and we set it to update the state. So we have the basic function of our to-do list working. Before we sync it up to local storage, I just want to say something, is that we are working in one file all along. And most React applications, they are component based. You don't just work on one file. That is one of the perks of using a JavaScript framework, so you can modularize your code and make it work in different files. The difference why I did not start that in the beginning is because I didn't want to complicate things. So let's make multiple files. So we're going to make a source folder and we're going to make one for adding. So we're going to say add to do.js, and a component starts like this. Okay, sorry, it should be .jsx actually. It should be show .jsx. So it starts like this: add to do. Make sure it's in capital letter and make sure the function name matches the file name. And we say export default add to do. So what we want to do here is that we want to return something, right? So return, we always want to return some JSX, and our JSX template is going to be here. This is the function of this component. And you notice that the component has dependencies, that is, it has things that it needs from this component, such as the handle submit function, this set input function. As you can see here, it needs things, and we'll pass in those in a minute. So to save this, we can destructure. So let's just leave this here for a second, and we'll write add to do. So we can render out that component like so, but it's going to give us an error that that component, as you can see, we've already imported it here. Make sure you import yours, and we don't have to put the .js. It's still going to tell us that that component needs some value. Handle submit is not defined, so we want to pass in values. These values are called props. Handle submit, we want to pass in handle submit, and we want to pass in set input, right? Set input. Copy this, and what we want to do with this structure. So this is how a way of exactly getting those values, and you can see that it still works, just that it's way more modularized and this is more reusable. We cannot stop there. We can still keep on going. We can turn this into a component, X this, and we'll make a component that says to-do list. Function, you know the drill. To-do list, and we want to export default to-do list, and we want to return a bunch of GSS, and as always it requires some values. So we want to take in those values, and the values that I require is actually to do. So it just requires to do, and it requires handle delete. Yes, we can pass in functions as props. We can pass in functions. So what we're going to do, we're going to say what is it called, to do list, and Visual Studio Code is going to automatically import that at the top here, as you can see. So we want to pass in those values that it needs, and the values that it needs are to do's and handle delete. So to do's, handle delete. And our delete is spelled wrong. You can forgive me for that. EEE still works, everything still works. So, but this is way more cleaner and way more modularized, as you can see here. So the next thing I want to do, I want to talk about adding CSS. So you can import component based CSS, like I could import the app.css for only this component. But I'm not going to do that. The by far way I just do that is that the index of CSS can affect any element, any component, wherever you are. So for me, this is like a simpler way of doing that. So I'm just going to get the CSS. This is not a CSS course by far, so I'm going to leave the CSS or the starter files or the file files in the description down below. So feel free to copy and paste the CSS. So we have that, as you can see, that is way more nicer. Way more nicer. So okay, so now let's start doing the this is where things get complicated a little bit now. This is where things get complicated. We're going to be using local storage, and local storage might confuse you. So I hope you don't get confused. What do we want to do? First of all, when we're setting to dos, we also want to set something in local storage. I'm going to clear this by the way. Okay, let's not full screen this anymore. Let's just let's adjust our code. So I want to set something in local storage, and the way we do that is by calling the local storage API dot set item to dos, and this is going to be key value pair. So the key is what we can use to get that value, and the value is going to be this. So anytime anybody adds a to do, it's going to set this value just like the way we're setting to the to dos, but it's going to set it to the to dos in local storage. So let's check that. Submit. You can see that, but there's a problem here. It says object. So this happens when you try and render an object in a string. And the way to fix that is to call JSON dot stringify. Okay, so now that is going to make us, so if you click on submit again, you can see that we can see that text properly. Clear. Local storage doesn't persist, so we can test it now. So test, and it's there. But one thing you notice that when we delete, it doesn't go away. So a way to fix that is by saying local storage dot set item to dos JSON dot stringify new to dos. So it's going to work now. So let's test it. Test. We can make multiple of these because they have an ID. So we can delete, and delete. So how do we make sure that when we refresh, as you can see here, how do we sync up the data to when we refresh so that we can do this? So this is when we're going to be using the most complicated hook in JavaScript, the use effect hook. And I'm going to try my absolute maximum best to break down this hook. It works like this. Use effect. Okay. It's a hook that runs when the page load, or it runs when a value of a state changes. Observe. So if we just say console.log, hey, save, we come here, we can see that hey gets console.log. It console.logs it when the value of it amounts. Forget that it's being console.log twice, that's like a development thing. But it only works when the value, just when the component is being initialized. But if we say to do's, what is going to happen? This is called a dependency array, by the way. It's going to console.log it every single time the value of to do's changes. So console.logs it, and even when it changes by deleting. So what do you want to use it to do? You just want to just load it when the page loads. We want to get the data from local storage and want to set it to our to do's here. So the logic goes as follows. If to do's dot length, okay, equal 0. So what it means that if we are starting the page and we don't have anything with to do's, what do we want to do? We want to set the value of to do's here. So we also want to run an if check here as well. So we want to say if not local storage dot get item, and this is how we get it, and we pass in our key to do's. And by the way, since it's stringify, to convert it back from a string to actually JavaScript, we do JSON dot parse. So want to say if not, that means if there's nothing in local storage, we don't want to do anything, just say set to do's. Don't really want to do anything here. Just say set to do's, maybe an empty array. Oh, we don't want to do anything here if there's nothing in local storage. But if there is something in local storage, we want to set to do's local storage dot get item to do's, and remember we have to say JSON dot parse. Remember. So save. Clear this, refresh the page, make sure we have no errors. Come to the application. Do we have anything in local storage? You can see it's already synced. And if I type hey guys, I have that. You can delete this guy, refresh the page, and it works. But There's one last optimization feature. We can make this even better by creating what is called a custom hook. This is a hook, the use state, and this is called the use effect hook. There are functions in React that allow us to do certain important functions like state. You have seen the importance of state, that without states we cannot render out anything. We cannot listen to when something changes, because if these were just normal values as you have seen, the UI will not re-render. And the importance of the use effect is to run code when the value of something changes, or at the beginning of when the component mounts. So what do we want to do? We can make our own custom hook in React, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. What we can do, we're going to name our file whatever you want. So I'm going to call this use local .js, not JSX, because we're not rendering out anything JSX here. So we're going to come here. We're going to, first of all, we're going to make our own function first of all. So we're going to Control Z this. Constant use, it has to start with the use keyword. We don't take in anything. Actually, we do. I'm going to paste in this. We're going to paste in the use effect hook. What do we take in here? To do's, right? And remember, we need in set to do's too. Set to do's. So what we have to do here, export default use local. Okay. And one last thing, in this file, we're using the use effect hook, so we have to import that. So what we can do is that we can write use local, import that, or to remember it has already been imported, and we pass in to do's and set to do's. By the way, this is not like the use effect hook where we're returning something. We could return something from here, like at the ending of the function, just return hey, a string, an array that we could save to a variable like the use state hook, but we're not returning anything. So we're just passing it here and here. Save and see if it still works. If our data still syncs, it still works. So I hope I have been able to teach you React in this short 20 or 30 minutes video, probably 30 minutes video. We have covered so many concepts in this video. So I wanted to go back, maybe watch the video again so you can quickly understand. So we have talked about JSX, JavaScript and HTML, events. This is how you make events in React. We've talked about the use state hook, why it's important, the use effect hook, making a custom hook. We've looked at how to inject dynamic values. Remember, we use curly braces, props, reusing components, reactive values. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and I'll see you in the very next tutorial.